Hi everyone, for our video today, we'll be talking about these three brushes from Eihodo, and these are his liquid foundation brushes. Now, I purchased these three from the Eihodo head office in Osaka when I went there in September of 2024, right before I hopped on a bullet train to go to Hiroshima to celebrate Fude Matsuri. So if you follow me here on YouTube or on Instagram, you might have seen me post a reel or a YouTube short of my visit there, and what made that so special is that I was actually able to meet Eihodo Hayashi, the owner of Eihodo, and he was actually a very warm and charming person, and I enjoyed spending my afternoon with him. So in the future, if you're a food lover and you're visiting Japan, most especially in Osaka, do drop by the Eihodo head office. I'm gonna put a Google Pin link down in the description box so that you can save it for a later date. Okay, so I've been playing around with these three brushes since September, and I do have to say that I enjoyed them immensely, and they work very well with me and my makeup sentiment. And what makes these three brushes quite special, in my opinion, is that you have different bristle types on each of the brush heads here, so you can use them for different purposes, different formulations, and also different consistencies. And that's what I love about it, because I was actually able to be very versatile with my makeup application with them, especially for base makeup. Okay, so for our video today, we'll be talking about each brush one by one, my experience using them, and with what type of products I like using them with. Okay, and just as an overview, these three brushes belong to the WP series of Eihodo, and brushes that belong to that series is often described to be brushes that have shorter total brush length with gold ferrules and a pearlescent handles. And by the way, the handles of these brushes are actually very short. I'm sure you can see that here. Now, the WP series, I believe, has 21 brushes in them, and if you're interested to know more about the WP series of Eihodo, I'm gonna put links down on the description box to either Fude Beauty or Fude Bobo, so you can go and check it out depending on your favorite brush retailer of choice. Okay, now I do have to say that the handles of these three brushes actually look very pretty. When I first saw them initially on fudebeauty.com, I was just like, oh, it's white handles, and I was very apprehensive of actually purchasing them because white handles get dirty very fast, especially when I am at work. But when I saw them in person, I saw that they were actually not white, but they had a very nice green tint to it. And depending on how you hold the brush, there's actually a nice pink that pops out as the color shifts in the light. It's actually a very beautiful brush. I kind of love it. And of course, it's still very shiny and very pearlescent. And it looks very elegant and very luxe in my hand. So if you're someone who enjoys shorter handled makeup brushes, you might look into this. Okay, and also one thing, by the way, one trivia: Eihodo brushes are produced by Chikuhodo, and I'm very confident in saying that because if you go to Eihodo's Instagram page, you can see Eihodo-san or the marketing team actually hashtagging Chikuhodo under every single brush that they actually present to you guys. Okay, all right, so let's talk about these brushes now one by one. Now, the first brush that I have here is the LQ one, and this is the one that has bristles made of synthetic fiber. Now, before I purchased this brush, I was actually eyeing it for quite some time on fudebeauty.com because I was just in the market for a brush head design like this. I love the width of it. I love the way that the brush head actually is domed as it nears the tips, but most especially I actually love the strength of this and just the way that it keeps its shape quite nicely, because I can actually see that there's so much strength at the tips of the bristles here, and that's actually what I love about this brush, because this can just really help me to blend out skincare or foundation or skin tints on the face. And I just love how it really glides the product on my skin, but most especially because it has a very thin brush head design, especially here on the side. It will not really suck up too much product, and for sure it will actually deliver the product well into my face. And even if the brush head here is wide, and even if it's made of synthetic fiber, it actually feels very soft on my skin. It doesn't apply too much pressure and it actually feels very comfortable to use. And because the brush head design here is made like, you know, in a way wherein it is domed and like, you know, it tapers, it can be used to apply like, you know, foundation or product in like, you know, hard to reach areas under the eyes, like, you know, here around the nose, or even like, you know, here close to like, you know, the brow area. I actually do like, you know, really enjoy this. Now I don't have a brush head similar to this in my collection, but I could say like, you know, it's actually quite comparable to the Chikuhodo R-LQ4. Now if you follow me here on like, you know, YouTube for quite a while, you would have seen me use this brush a lot for like, you know, liquid foundation application. Now although I enjoy this immensely and I still use it to this day, my only like, you know, frustration with this brush is that the tips here actually like, you know, get deformed as you start to use them. So for example, if I just like, you know, re-drag the brush here on my skin, and if we put it here to the side, you can see that the brush is already like, you know, deformed. It doesn't keep its shape like, you know, the way that this brush does. And I think I can attribute that to the width design of the brush head here, because although both brush heads here like, you know, almost look the same in terms of like, you know, brush head length, but because the width is different, I think this is the one that gives the LQ1 more core strength than the R-LQ4 here. But I love them both and I use them like, you know, sometimes together, and depending on the kind of finish that I want. So for example, if I need more strength in a brush for liquid foundation application, I would use this you know, to really drag out the product. And because the brush head here is wider, I can actually like, you know, apply like, you know, foundation application in a much more wider sense on the face in comparison to this. But if I want to like, you know, buff out or apply like, you know, liquid foundation in a very specific area on the face, for example here in the under eye area, I would use the R-LQ4 just because it has a smaller brush head design, so it can give me more targeted application of like, you know, product in a specific area on the face. Okay, but I do love the LQ1 here. Amazing brush. Now the next brush that I have here is the LQ2 brush, and this is the brush that has a brush head made of goat hair. Now on fudebeauty.com, it's actually not specified there what type of goat hair is used on this, but I think this is Chikuhodo, so I'm just like, you know, basing this off of feeling. But I do have to say that this actually feels very nice and very soft on my skin. It doesn't have any prickling sensation at all, and the pressure that it applies is actually very comfortable. So I'm actually very happy about that, because there are some Chikuhodo goat hairs in the market that is used for foundation application. Sometimes can feel a little prickly. Now the brush head design here is flat and round, but if we put it to the side here, you can actually see that it's actually quite full in the belly here, and this fullness is what gives this brush this amazing application and buffing ability on the face. And I have used this brush for like, you know, more difficult to blend out foundation, like, you know, formulations. Like for example, if it's a little bit moussey or a little bit thicker, and if I'm also using foundations that like, you know, don't give you enough playtime, I use this because this just like, you know, really buffs out and blends out product extremely well and extremely fast on the face. And I've actually also used this for like, you know, cream bronzer, or like even for cream blushes. They actually work very well, and I love like, you know, the color of the bristles here. It looks very golden and very silky, and look how the light reflects off of that. Now I only have one brush that almost shares the same brush head design as this, and it's actually this brush from Meow. So this brush I bought in 2018 when I was there for Fude Matsuri, and I bought this at the Meow kiosk at the Fude market. Now unfortunately, I can't seem to pinpoint what is the name of this brush because this was an OEM brush, and there's actually a marker here of the brand that this brush was made for, so I can't really flip it over. But if we put both of these brushes side by side, you can see that they're almost similar in brush head shape, but there's just a difference wherein if we put them side by side here, you can see that the makeup brush here from Meow is airier and rounder at the tips, and it blooms wider as well in comparison to the Eihodo LQ2 here, wherein it just maintains this very steady, like, fullness even as it nears the top of the bristles here. But I've actually also enjoyed using this brush for foundation application, even cream application. But there was a time that I found using this to be a little bit streaky. So I still keep it in my kit sometimes, and I would even use it for setting powder foundations in the under eye area, or even a very specific part of the face. And for sure, I can actually use this for that specific purpose as well. And I love that we have a smaller brush head here, because again, we can use it for smaller areas of the face and for targeted application of product. And the final brush that we have here is the LQ3 brush, and this is the brush that has a brush head made of weasel. Now, weasel bristles are my most favorite bristle types to use because they're very versatile. I can use them for an array of formulas, may it be powder, gel, cream, liquid, you name it, they work extremely well. And in me saying that, this brush head is the most expensive brush amongst the other brushes that I showed you guys today, okay? Now, what I love about the brush head here is actually the size, because this can just really help me to be very specific with my product application on the face. And also, one other thing, it actually glides very nicely on my skin. It feels very silky, no prickling sensation at all, and it dances even better than the LQ1, because the LQ1 here, because of the width of the brush head, see, in comparison to that, it applies more pressure on the face. As you guys can see, it tugs on my skin, especially if I'm very strong with my application of product. But with the LQ3 here, with almost the same pressure, it doesn't tug as much as the LQ1. So if you're someone who has very sensitive skin, and if you have reactions to plastic bristles, the LQ3 is a nice option for you to have. So I use this for an array of foundation products, may it be thin consistencies or even creams. And I also use this a lot for liquid highlights. And most recently, I've been enjoying using the LQ3 for liquid contour application, because the brush design here is just quite perfect with that. And because the bristle tips here are quite airy, I can also use the tips to actually blend out the product. So yeah, so that's the gist of it. That's the difference between these three brushes. So I hope that that's useful and insightful. And at this point, I'm going to share with you guys some of the products that I love using each of these brushes with. Okay, so before we go on to application, let me do say that I already have my skincare down. I have my sunscreen on, and everything that I'm going to be using today is going to be listed down on the description box, okay? All right, so I'm going to be using the LQ1 now. So the LQ1 usually I use for skincare application on the face. So for example, I have here my Lisa Eldridge Mist. I'm just going to spray this all over. Now, sometimes I use my fingers to pat the product in, but sometimes I also like using the LQ1, especially if I want to apply more of this product onto the face. So for example, I have some of the product here on my metal palette. I'm just gonna pick it up with this brush, and I'm just gonna really apply it very specifically all over the face, especially if I just want to add more in a specific area. Now, I also love using this brush when I want to apply primers that are very silicone in nature, because the bristles here can just really handle that type of formulation, and it can just really help me to really press it into my skin. And I could be very specific with it, especially in the areas where usually we have texture and we have our pores showing. So in this area, this brush, I can just really press the type of primer formulas into the skin extremely well. Okay, so I'm just gonna let that settle in for a teeny tiny bit. Okay, and right now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna get the LQ3 and I'm just gonna apply a hint of liquid highlight on the face. And I'm gonna be using my Elevated Glow highlighter from Lisa Eldridge, and I have a little bit of that here on my palette, and I'm just loading the product here into the brush head, and I am gonna be using this brush for that. Now, the reason why I love using the LQ3 for this is because I find that the LQ3 has a very nice ability of actually spreading out the product and really buffing it into the skin. And I don't know, just for some strange reason, I find that they both work effectively well together. And I can also be very specific with the application of the highlighter. So look at that, it's already popping on my skin, and it blends extremely well. Okay, now the reason why I do this is because I prefer to use the Elevated Glow highlighter before I apply foundation all over the skin. Okay, all right. Okay, so now I'm gonna apply some foundation, and I'm gonna pick up the LQ1 here, and I'm gonna be picking up a little bit of this liquid foundation here, and this is my Armani foundation. And I just love how this brush really helps me to apply this type of foundation consistency on the skin. Now, I don't really like buffing foundation much, and the way that I apply foundations is I apply them in thin layers on top of each other, and usually always in the same direction. That usually gives me a very nice smooth application of color, and I think you guys can see that there was no streaky application whatsoever, and it blends out easily. Look at that. And let me apply some of that here in my forehead. Again, I'm doing it all in one direction because that just really helps with the blending. Very smooth, very natural, and you don't get a lot of residue on the bristles as well. So at least you're using every single drop of the foundation that you are applying. Okay, now I'm just gonna apply a little bit of the foundation here around my nose, and a little bit of that here in the under eye area. So just gonna pat it in. Look at that, very nice even application of the foundation. I absolutely love it. Now this also goes the same when I'm going to be using the LQ3. So let me just get a little bit of the Armani foundation using the LQ3, and I'm just going to apply this all over, and I'm also going to blend it out. I'm also using the LQ3 in the similar way that I'm using the LQ1. I'm applying the foundation in small layers and all in one direction. Now, the only difference that I see between the LQ1 and the LQ3 is that the LQ3 tends to pick up more foundation, so it's going to apply more coverage and more of the formula into the skin. And that's because you have a thicker core here, so it's going to pick up more. So in comparison to that of the LQ1, okay? But they actually have the same ability of actually applying and blending out product onto the skin. Okay, I'm gonna use the tips of the bristles now to apply foundation around my nose area, around my lips, and I'm gonna blend that well into my skin. Okay, so now I have here some cream foundation, and I'm going to be using my LQ2 with this, and I'm just going to use this in a light layer all over. And this is my MAC full coverage foundation, by the way. So this is in C40 and NC35 mix. So I'm just loading a little bit of the foundation here on the tips of the bristles, and I'm just going to apply it in a specific manner, like here in my under eye area. And I'm just going to buff that out and to blend that out. And as you guys can see, it was actually able to pick up product extremely fast from the palette. and I was actually also able to blend it out in no time. And I was just very specific with the application of the foundation, in areas where I need more coverage. And I'm so glad that the brush head design here and size really helped me to do that. Okay, and I'm also using it in a patting motion, like a puff brush, and that also just really helps to blend out and also to increase opacity and coverage. Now, by the way, I am shooting with a mix of artificial light and natural light today, and I'm also shooting in a different part of my house. I am now in my sala, so I hope that you guys don't mind that, and I'm just so glad that we still have ample light here right now, because I rarely shoot in this part. I just jabbed myself, because I rarely shoot in this part of my house, and I hope that you don't mind if I'm going to be shooting here maybe for the next few weeks, because I am about to move homes. Okay, so now I have some of my Chanel cream bronzer here, and I've already added a little bit of that here on my palette. And with the LQ2 here, I'm just gonna pick up the product and I'm just gonna apply this all over my cheeks here. Look how well this brush applies the product. Very nice and even, very well buffed out, and also I was able to apply it in no time. And let me just apply a little bit of that here on my forehead and buff it out. Very easy. And a little bit here on my jawline area as well, and here at the sides of my nose. Now, what's so amazing with this brush, even if it's quite strong, it doesn't really disturb the products that you applied before. But then again, I'm also very careful on how I apply and blend out product. I always approach everything with caution. And with a tapping motion, I'm just going to further blend out that gel bronzer. And we have this very nice flush of color now on my cheeks. Nice warmth. Love this gel bronzer from Chanel. Okay, next let's apply some cream blush. I'm still going to be using the LQ2 here, and I'm just going to pick up a little bit of this here on the tips of the bristles. Now, I've said earlier, I just have to be very careful with how I actually apply and blend out the product, because this brush head buffs out color extremely well. So I just have to approach this with caution and also with a little bit of effort, just so that I apply the color in a very specific area of the face. And what I love about this brush is because there's so much strength in the core of this. It actually picks up pigment very well from the pan, and I'm actually able to buff it out also at the same time. And we have this very nice soft application of color on the cheeks. Okay, I'm just gonna pick up some of the cream blush here, and I'm gonna add more. So this brush is very effective in actually layering on color onto the cheek, but you just have to be very careful and to be very intent with the way that you actually apply color onto your face. Okay, look at that. Very nice and very soft. But then again, if you're also using blushes that have very strong pigmentation on them, and you're going to be using this brush, I would have to tell you to approach it with caution, because this brush picks up so much product and it also applies so much product in one go. So thin layers is always the key when you're using the LQ2. But so far, I think you guys can see that the LQ2 is a very versatile brush. You can use it for an array of products and formulations as well, okay? All right. So before we go on to powder, I just want to apply one more liquid product, and it's actually this Rare Beauty liquid contour. So this is in the color Solace. I just got this recently and I enjoy it. And I'm going to be using the LQ3 now, and I'm going to use this to apply contour on this part of my face. And I'm just going to pick up a little bit of the product at the tips of the bristles here. And I'm just going to lightly mount it on top of my cheekbone. So as you guys can see, the brush head of this can really help you to be very specific with your application. And now what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna remove any excess product here at the back of my hand, and I'm gonna blend that contour into the bronzer so that we have a very nice seamless application of color. Okay, look at that. Nice mix of bronzer and contour, and I love how this brush works for me in applying that type of formulation. Very nice. Look at that. Lovely. And with whatever is left on the brush head of the LQ2 here, whatever color, I'm just going to apply this on top. And everything just looks nice and blended and married together. Okay, look at that. Amazing, yeah? So we're nearing the end of our vlog for today. So I'm just buffing out the LQ2 here on a microfiber towel to remove any excess product. Because what I want to do now is I want to show you guys how I use the LQ2 for powder foundation. So this is my old MAC Studio Fix powder foundation in NC35. And I'm just swirling the brush here on the pan. And I'm just going to lightly dab the brush here in my under eye area because it just really helps me to set that part of my face, and I'm also able to blend that out. Now again, as a word of caution, you have to be very careful when you're using this brush for this types of formulations because the brush head is very thick. So it's going to pick up more product, not unless if you're very intent with the type of coverage that you want on your face and also opacity. So if you're someone who has very oily skin like I do, you can use this brush with this formula. Well, not with this formula because they just recently reformulated the Studio Fix foundation powder. But I think you guys can see what I'm talking about. And I'm just really patting in the powder here onto my face. So let me apply a little bit of this NC35 on this side of my face now. So just use this brush in a tapping motion, the way that you'd use a sponge or a puff, because there's no airiness in this, and also the size of this is very small that you're not able to encompass your entire face with powder. And also one thing, by the way, I also love using the LQ2 here for finishing powder. So this finishing powder from Hourglass, this is called Radiant Light. It's one of my most favorite colors as a finishing powder. And this just really adds a very nice specific application of finishing powder here on my cheeks, where I usually love to put it on. And it also just really blends fantastically well. Remember, Chikuhodo goat hairs are great to use for baked gelée formulas. Okay, and to finish everything off, let's apply some highlighting powder. So let's pick up maybe this color here, and I'm going to be using the LQ3. So I'm just going to be very careful in how much product I pick up from the pan because this is also a very strong brush head. And as you guys can see, the LQ3 can be very specific in applying the highlighting color. And with whatever is left on the brush head, I'm just going to apply it there and here and maybe here. Lovely. Okay, and one more here and here. Alright, so I believe we have come to the end of our vlog for today. So I hope that you guys enjoyed me showing you how I use my liquid foundation brushes from Eihodo. So again, I have here LQ1, LQ2, and LQ3. So they actually work very well for me. They work very well together, and they work with an array of products and formulas, making them an essential part of my brush kit. Okay, alright, so that's it for me today. So if you guys have any more questions about how I use these brushes, please let me know down in the comments box and let's have a conversation about it. Okay, alright, so that's it for me today. So I'm gonna let you guys go now. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for being here, and I hope that you're having a good day wherever you are. Bye.